And we're back. It's another scorcher here in Dubai, where the current temperature is 37 degrees Celsius outside. But just having got into my car, it is well in excess of that. So we've got the aircon on full blast, hoping to make it a little bit more bearable here. But that's enough of the weather report. It occurred to me that every generation, I think it's actually Brian Adams who said, every generation blames the one before. And every generation always tells the next generation how good they have it. And of course, there is a lot of truth in that, because the living standards, the quality of life, the longevity due to improved healthcare and advances in medical science keeps extending our lifespan. But it occurred to me that in my lifetime, in a single generation, there have been dramatic improvements in the quality of life as well. My brother is 10 years younger than me, and his experience of growing up was actually vastly different from my own. Hello, I'm Gerrit, and I'm a Dutch guy living in Dubai, which is in the United Arab Emirates in the Middle East. In previous videos, I've talked about how the first moments of my life was spent in a basement flat with my parents. But from there, we actually moved into a house. Now, I use the word house loosely. The first recollection of a house that I have was in a dead-end street in Utrecht, and that street was called the Lamstraat, which translates the Lamb Street. Lamb being of the meh variety. Now don't worry, there's no sheep or lamb in the car here. That's how good I am with accents. So yeah, it was a dead-end street. And I said that I used the term house loosely. Because when we always say that the next generation has it better than we had it, in this case, it actually is quite true. Because one of the things that occurred to me is that the baseline of which we measure improvement in life has actually shifted dramatically over time, right? As older people will no doubt know, and younger people won't necessarily recognize. Now, I recognize that in the Western world, in Western Europe, there is actually a dramatic housing shortage for a variety of reasons, which means that it's near impossible for young people, for starters, to actually get their own house. However, even I started life like this when I moved. Even I started life like this when I moved out of my parents' home. Um, I didn't immediately move into a house of my own. I actually rented rooms in another person's house. And it is actually quite common to live in a commune, a communal accommodation where a landlord may actually rent out a house by the room rather than the whole house to one family. So they rent it out, and typically students use that type of accommodation. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. But this is what I'm getting at when I say the baseline has shifted. Because although it may be difficult to find accommodation, any accommodation, and I think it's actually maybe even stipulated by law now, it needs to have minimum requirements to be considered habitable by human beings. And some of these things are, it needs to have sanitation, right? It needs to have a bathroom. It needs to have a shower or a bath. It needs to have a toilet. It needs to have a sink. It needs to have hot and cold water. It needs to have heating, typically central heating or air conditioning, where you can regulate the temperature in the rooms to be suitable for human habitation. So the baseline has changed because when I was born and when I grew up and when we moved to this first house, and even the second house, which will be discussed in later memories, we did not have a bathroom in the house. It may be hard to believe, but we actually did not have a bathroom. There was no shower in the house. There was no toilet in the house. The whole house did not have any form of central heating. There was a stove in the kitchen, a wood-fired stove, which was actually for cooking, and it produced heat at the same time. And there was a coal-burning heater in the living room, which meant that the rest of the house, not that there was much rest of the house, but we'll get to that as well. But those were the only two places where there was a form of heating. The kitchen with the stove and a coal-fired, I don't know what you call this actually. In Dutch, we call it een kachel. I'll show a picture on the screen here, what it looked like. But that's how we heated the house. Now, this house in the Lamstraat, in this dead-end road, I mean, I was very small, so I do remember that house, but some of the details are fuzzy. It was it was a working class neighborhood. It was literally everyone knew everyone else. People used to sit in front of the house. But there must have been maybe, I don't know, a dozen houses there. I don't think there was more than a dozen. So all the houses in a row, all the front doors, and then the windows next to the front doors, which was actually the kitchen. The kitchen was looking into the street. Opposite, on the other side of that dead-end street, were a brick of sheds. Brick sheds. In Dutch, we call it a schuur. So that's where you could store your bicycle and whatever else stuff you might have. But there were two key components to that shed. One was the toilet was actually in that shed. I remember that clearly. There was a toilet in that shed. So if you wanted to go to the toilet, you actually had to walk out your front door of the house, cross that little road, street, and then go into the shed. And you best do it during the day because there was no light in that shed. There was no light. Which meant that all your number twos, you best take care of them during the day because you did not want to have to go to the toilet at night. I mean, number ones were taken care of by, believe it or not, a potty. A pot next to the bed. So if you needed to have a wee during the night, you would use the potty. Especially in winter, it was not uncommon for that street to be covered in snow, and you would have to plow through the snow to get to the toilet. Not very pleasant at all. Not very pleasant. The other key component in that shed was actually a big box where we kept the coal for the fire. So every now and then we had a truck pull up, and I still remember that. We used to have a coal delivery service in jute. Is that a word, jute? I think it's jute. It's Hessian bags. Big Hessian bags. The coal guy would deliver the coal to the house in these Hessian bags. And he would fill up. It was quite a deep box. And even in the house where my mum lives today, that box in the shed still exists. Of course, it's not being used for coal anymore. She just uses it for storing stuff. But the kolenboer, if I translate it, it makes no sense. The coal farmer. He didn't farm any coal. Right? But that guy, he would come. Now, that must have been a job and a half, I tell you. These guys were always black as the night, of course, covered in coal dust. And they would deliver these coal bags, carried off the flatbed, of the truck, carry it over their shoulder into the shed and dump it into that coal container, which had a little hatch at the bottom, that when you opened the little sliding door, the coal would fall out and you could fill up your cola kit. I'll show that on the screen here as well. You could fill up your coal container to carry it into the house so that you could tip it into your coal burning fire. So, two key components in that shed: the coal storage and the toilet. Considering that we did not have any hot water in that house, we didn't have any bathroom in that house, no shower, no bath. When I was small, bath time meant a zinc tub on the kitchen floor, summer or winter. And that tub would be standing on the cold floor in a drafty house filled with cold water from the kitchen tap. Now, let me explain something to you. When I say cold water from the kitchen tap, I am not talking about Dubai style cold water, where even the cold water is so hot that in summer we switch off the water heater, we switch off the hot water because the cold water is already too hot to have a comfortable bath or shower in, considering it's 45 degrees outside. What would be nicer than having a cold shower? Doesn't exist. Because the cold water is in the 30 degrees Celsius when it comes out of the tap. It is actually ridiculous. No, no, no. In the Netherlands, cold water means cold water in the single digit degrees when talking about Celsius, the scale of Celsius. So that water is so cold that you cannot actually put a child in there in that water. So what would happen is that my mum would use a kettle to boil water on the stove to not make the bath warm because, that tub would just be too big. It would take too long and too many kettles. And by the time that you've reached kettle free, the cold water would have already taken over by lowering the temperature again of the first two kettles that you chucked in there. So it was really only to take the edge off that you could actually sit in that bath and be washed. So yeah, that was not very comfortable. As I got older, I remember because obviously my dad didn't fit in that tub. Well, not that I've ever tried. I've seen him try, but I don't think so. So he actually used to go to a bathhouse. Bathhouses have been around since the Romans, right? They're very, very old. Typically, I guess, combined with a swimming pool as well. But I do remember that a few times when I was older, he used to take me to the bathhouse, which is just row after row of showers. Very much the similar idea of what we see in the gym now, I suppose. But these bathhouses were geared towards people that didn't have bath facilities in their houses. Now, I do remember that you only were granted a few minutes in your cubicle. And I mean, I'd be lying if I said that I knew how many minutes. But I've got a feeling it was like maybe 7 minutes or something, And then they would start hammering on the door to tell you that you were running out of time. So maybe the total time that you were given was 10 minutes. But they would start knocking on the door, telling you to get out, basically. So yeah, when I was a bit bigger, I used to go to the bathhouse. But initially, bath time, zinc kitchen tub on the kitchen floor with cold water, with some boiling water prepared on the stove to take the edge off. That was fun. Not. Now, that is what I remember from that street. And as I said, everyone knew everyone else. Now, I know that a few doors down, he was actually one of my best friends when I grew up. He was not my granddad. I think he was actually the brother. I think so. I think he was the brother of my grandmother. which I'm not sure what that makes him to me, other than a very nice old guy who I called Granddad. Granddad Ewijk. I still remember. Granddad. He was a man, I only remember him ever living on his own. I don't know if he ever was married or what happened to his wife. But I used to go for walks with that man for hours. And he was great. He was my real granddad from my father's side. I mean, he wasn't much of a granddad at all, to be honest. Never really cared much for me, and I never really cared much for him. All I remember of that guy is just always sleeping in the couch or in his chair with his flat cap pulled over his nose, half a cigar sticking out of his mouth, or alternatively his false teeth resting on his top teeth, resting on his lower lip. And he was just lying there with his hands on his stomach like this, sleeping. But this Opa Ewijk, I mean, he was an awesome guy. He always had this lines here because he always had chewing tobacco in his mouth. I remember that as well. He had a little metal box, and he always used to grab this little tab, and he always had this chewing tobacco, and it's chewing. It's quite gross, you know, when I think about it. The tobacco saliva would actually run down the corners of his mouth. But what a lovely man. On the other side, there was a big fat guy. I don't know. His name, I think, was Gerrit. My name is Gerrit. He had the shorter version of the name. Gerrit. I think so. Now, what I remember of that guy is he had a German Shepherd, an Alsatian. But that Alsatian was always on a chain in the shed. So the dog didn't live in the house. He lived in the shed across. And that dog was mean as well. That dog was so mean. If that chain wasn't there, he would attack you. The door was always open for some reason on that shed. That dog would always be in the door opening, and whenever you would walk past, the chain was just long enough for him to reach the door, but not go out of the shed. And he would be on his hind legs, pulled back by the chain, barking and foaming at the mouth. That dog was crazy, I tell you. But for some strange reason, and I don't know, maybe he was just protecting his shed. If he was out of his shed, he was actually approachable. I mean, he was never a lovely dog, don't get me wrong. But I do remember that one time I had a friend called Flip. F-L-I-P. And Flip and I actually took that crazy dog for a walk. I don't know why, I don't know how, I don't know where or what. But I do remember that we actually took that lunatic dog for a walk. And he was all right. So we had him on the leash and we walked around with him. When we were finished with the walk and we took him back, man, I never forget this. We took him back to the house, and when he saw his shed, I mean, we were little nippers, we were small guys. And Flip was actually holding the leash. And this dog just took off and ran into his shed. But as he ran into his shed, he pulled Flip with him. We had just walked this dog without any hassle, right? He ran into his shed, pulled Flip with him. As Flip got to the shed, this bloody dog turned around and he bit him in the stomach. Can you believe it? What an evil, evil, evil dog. So that was not very nice. That I remember as well. This stupid dog just turned around and grabbed my friend and bit him on the stomach. Till Gerrit grabbed this dog and kicked him. He actually kicked him into the shed. I remember that. So yeah, that's the Lamstraat. Now, the Lamstraat, I grew up there initially on my own, of course. As I may have mentioned already, my sister, I come from a family of 3 children. My sister was 5 years younger than me. My brother is 10 years younger than me. So there's quite a big gap. But I remember that house clearly. I remember when you walked into the front door, there were stairs straight in front of you going up. You turned left, there was a door opening. There's an absolute lunatic there. Unbelievable. Very dangerous. So through the front door, stairs going up, turn left, through the door opening, you walk straight into the kitchen, where the window was looking out into the street, as I said, and there was a granite sink under the window with only a cold water tap. Then against the far wall, if you walk into that door there was the stove. Now these stoves now, I think they're worth money, you know, they're actually fashion symbols. Then they were pure necessity. They were cast iron stoves, very heavy, with a metal lever. And there were big metal plates, heavy cast iron plates. And you would lift that up and you would throw fire, you would throw the wood into that fire there. And then that's where you would cook. There was a little door in the front, which was an oven. Yeah, that's what I remember. Eh? And also I seem to remember that stove, I'm not sure, but I think it burned 24 hours a day. It was always on. Because if it went off, it would have been quite a mission, I think, to fire it up again. So I think that thing always burned. Also because, as I said, that was the source of heat as well. And then, next to the door into the kitchen, on the right side, there was a storage cupboard under the stairs, which are, as I said, are going up. So that was a storage cupboard. I don't think it was a cellar. I think it was a storage cupboard. But I do remember that on the door, on the outside, was a coffee grinder. A Douwe Egberts coffee grinder. You put coffee beans in the top. And there was like a lever, or what do you call it, on the front that you would swing around, and there was a little glass container that hang off it on the bottom. And as you were grinding the beans, of course, it would make coffee grounds, which you could then use in your filter to brew, I should probably say, to brew your pot of coffee in the stove. Then you would walk inside a living room area, which wasn't very big. In the corner, there was the coal-fired heater. I will also put a photo of that up here. With the coal kit, the coal bucket that you would fill outside in the shed. And then you can see from the design how it's shaped. You could lift a little door on the top of that heater. You could literally tip the coal inside to burn and to heat the room. We didn't have a TV. I think a TV only came much later. There was a lounge. And then on the back of that lounge, we actually had a very long garden. That I remember as well. A very deep garden. Before you got into the garden, there was like a, what do you call that? You know, an area where you take off your boots, you hang up your coat so that you don't take all the garden dirt straight into the living room. In Dutch, we call it a klompenhok. Anyway, I'm hoping you understand what I mean when I said that. The way I describe it, area where you take off your boots, hang up your coat, so that you don't drag all the dirt into the house. And then from there, you walked into this very deep garden. Now, my dad, he had a hobby. And his hobby was duivenmelker. So it's a guy that keeps raising pigeons. That was his hobby. So the first thing that you saw when you walked into the garden was this elevated pigeon coop. Is it a coop? I'm not a racing pigeon expert. So that's where he kept his racing pigeons. And every now and then I remember we have these baskets made out of rattan it's called. Rattan baskets. They made furniture out of it as well. These reed baskets. They're quite shallow. But you place your pigeons in there, and you put the little ring on the leg, and then they would get shipped out in these baskets to I don't know, the south of France, Spain, and then he would sit there in the garden, shaking a tin, waiting for these pigeons to come back. I don't think he ever won anything. If he did, I never saw it. But anyway. You walk into the garden, that's the first thing that was there, his pigeons. After that, on one side, we had a long chicken coop. We had chickens, and we had a very big, aggressive rooster. But I've been told that the rooster was friendly with me. That's something I don't remember, but I do seem to remember that rooster was rather large. It was a very big bird, that rooster, and we had many chickens. So we always had eggs. Also, when I was small and we moved to that house, they got me a goat. And there are still some photos of me with that baby goat that we kept for quite some time. So we had chickens, we had pigeons, we had a goat, and then we had also rabbits. Look at this zoo here. This place is always so crazy. This is the school where I'm fetching my grandson. And I don't want to say anything nasty, but there's all big cars. And typically, the fathers are at work, so they are not fetching the children. I'm gonna leave it at that. Otherwise, I get accused of being sexist. But it is a bit of a zoo, this place. And they've actually improved it with parking here. But it's still not optimal. Okay, I'm gonna go in the sand here. This is where it pays to have a Jeep in 4-wheel drive. Because we can actually take some shortcuts, which I've done right now. So here we are. We're a little bit early. I need to get my badge, so let me do that so long, otherwise I forget that. Yeah, so we had a bit of a menagerie going on in the house. The fact that I remember all of these things actually must mean that I've got some fond memories, otherwise why would I remember it? It was nice, you know? But I do remember that it was like camping in a brick building. No, actually, let me be fair to camping. Camping today had more creature comforts than that house had when I lived there. Now, that little street doesn't exist anymore, by the way, because I said it was a very old working class neighborhood. So it was completely demolished. The last thing I forgot about that house was that when you went up the stairs, that's where we slept. But I'm almost certain I know it's a large attic, but there was no rooms there. I think it was one big open space which was separated by a curtain or curtains. And that's where we slept. And of course there was no heater. Maybe some heat would rise up from downstairs, but I'm sure by now you must have figured out that in 1960, whatever it was, we didn't have double glazing. We didn't have insulation. We didn't have a nice warm roof on that house. So any heat that would have risen up from the kitchen and the lounge, by the time it would have reached those sleeping quarters, would have long since disappeared already. So yeah, so that's what some of my active memories are from that place. And there was also something I remember now. I was a real pain in the backside. And potty training me was an absolute disaster. Not because I couldn't, I just didn't want to. And there was a lady, and I don't know whatever relation she was to the family, but I called her Tante Lien, Aunt Lien. And she was a lovely, lovely lady. Because one of the things I used to do as well is I must have been 2 years or 3 years old, I don't know. And I still would shit in my pants. And I remember that I would tell my mom, I shat my pants, but don't you dare hit me. And then my mom would take off her slipper and hit me. Then I went to Tante Lean, Aunt Lean, because I thought I was clever. So instead of getting smacks from my mum, I used to go to Aunt Lean, and she would change me. Very nice lady. She would wash me. She would change me. Of course, I didn't have any underpants then. And she would use a tea towel and wrap that around me so I could walk home at least dressed. But of course, 3 years old, I thought I was smart. It made no bloody difference because the moment my mom saw I was wearing a tea towel instead of my underpants, the slipper came out and smacked. So yeah, Aunt Lean, she was a good lady, took care of me when I was a pain in the backside. So those are my memories of the Lamstraat. Now it makes me nostalgic, to think about how life has changed. But life changed, it progressed, it improved, and the quality of life got better. And now I'm going to say something which is going to be quite politically incorrect to quite some people, I'm sure. I don't mean it like that, but life changed within the values, the boundaries, and the concepts of a society, a Dutch society, where people had the same norms and values no matter where they fitted in pecking order. And this is where I get nostalgic when I see how cities like Utrecht, actually because of demographic changes, things change in a city, which sometimes make me miss the old days, I don't mind different value sets, but I've been an immigrant my whole life myself. Right? I left my country and I moved around. But wherever I actually ended up living, I've always felt that I needed to fit in and adjust to that society. I'm Dutch. I have my own culture, my own value systems, but I cannot attempt to change a country like where I now live, for instance, the UAE, and make it a Dutch city. It just doesn't work like that. I have to fit into this culture, into this value system, while still maintaining who I am. I'm missing that. I don't know if I make sense or not, but if I see how things have changed, and I've been away a long time now. I've been away out of my country for 40 plus years. So whenever I go back and I see how things have changed, it makes me nostalgic. Yeah. No, I'm not saying that it shouldn't change. I just miss it. That's it. I hope that's allowed. So, I'm sure in later videos I'll talk more about that. But I think for now I'm gonna leave it there. It's 3:30. The school is now finished. So my grandson will be coming out. So I'm going to leave it here. And I'm going to tell you, thank you very much. Please do me a favor. It doesn't cost you anything. So like my video by pressing that little thumbs up. Subscribe by smashing that subscribe button and tinkle that little bell so you get some alerts when I post another video. And when that next video is, you'll see. But until then, I'll be signing off, and I'll be saying bye-bye.